Welcome to our Easter Sunday meeting. We're really excited about this meeting today, and it's raining a bit in the background here, so you might hear a bit of rain, but that doesn't matter. We can still hear each other, and we're going to talk about the resurrection today, and it's one of our really important topics on our heart. We spoke about the cross before in our previous meeting because of Good Friday, and I was going to I know this is one of your really topic you love to talk about a lot, but before, let me just say that Ruth and myself, Kent, that I just been thinking about the United Nations yesterday, and often we decry it because of its corruption. And that's true. We have corruption not only in that institution, but in all our institutions around the world, and corruption in this world, and where to penetrate, where to be salt and light in this world to bring about renewal and change. But if you think about the United Nations from a Christian perspective and the Christian roots of it, like it's one of its main logos is a man beating a sword into a plough, which is a vision of new creation that comes, and this is what resurrection is about, new creation that comes from Isaiah. And the Isaiah's vision has to really give us a vision for our lives and our community and the way we love and follow God. But the two central ideas from a Christian perspective of the United Nations is first the cross, because in the cross we deny ourselves and we reach out to serve others. And that is the only way that new life can come to our world. And also the vision of the United Nations from a Christian perspective is a new world. It's a new creation that comes about through the cross. The cross life, denying ourselves, taking up our cross to serve others, brings about a new creation, a new life, a new community. And so the cross and resurrection is central to a true vision of change like the UN has. And if we take that cross and resurrection out and just pursue United Nations or other things on a secular basis, secular I mean without God, without the knowledge of God, we're lost.
It can't work.
And we're going to go back to paganism and destruction, and corruption will take over. We're really excited about these themes that just generate and regenerate our lives, the cross and the resurrection of Christ.
That bring genuine change.
I know the resurrection is big in your heart.
I love speaking about the resurrection. I love teaching about it to our Bible school students because we've somehow pushed resurrection to the side in our theology, and we've forgotten the absolute importance of the fact that Jesus rose bodily from the dead.
Well, a lot of us today don't even believe in a resurrection anymore, to be honest. I mean,
they just ignore it.
Yeah, a lot of times people think that resurrection is the new birth. It's only a spiritual encounter, that when we die we go to heaven forever and we don't have a resurrected body. And that's more of a recent, it's a recent change.
200 years ago, they definitely didn't think that.
Well, we used to look through the cemeteries in England and
see
the old graves,
Yeah.
and all of them talk about the resurrection of the
They
body.
all talk about the day when that day dawns, which is an echo of many Old Testament passages, but also the book of John, the Gospel of John, on that first day of the week. And it was bringing together the whole 7-day creation from Genesis, the whole poetry of that 7-day thinking that on the first day of a new week, a new kind of creation dawns, where death is overcome, where sickness is overcome, where suffering is overcome, where it doesn't have to be the same anymore. They were mourning, the apostles and all of those who followed Jesus from Galilee were mourning about the death of their prophet, Jesus. They didn't understand that he was going to overcome death.
Yeah, and this is rooted in Old Testament Hebrew faith, that the creation, that God is restoring his creation. I think that many times today we have a very Greek view of the faith, where it's just a spiritual thing in heaven, and this world doesn't matter. And it's sort of like a selfish view of the world, that we can just sort of trash the world, and we can have war, and we can exploit resources, and we can have personal prosperity.
Yeah.
But in the sense of any real future for this world, we don't value that. We
No.
don't. And so it's
It's belittling the creation.
yeah,
isn't it?
and we're in danger of destroying
Yeah.
this creation, and like in the days of Noah flood, having some big catastrophe come about.
And the ecologists have some justification in rebuking us and reminding us about global warming and climate change and all of these things. Whether you believe in those things or not, it's not the point. The truth is that we are destroying this beautiful world that God made.
Or you talk about natural habitats
Yeah.
and forestation, or we see that around here in where we
severely.
live here in Jos in northern Nigeria. The depletion of the soils is almost complete. These soils have become almost totally infertile, and they end up being turned to desertification.
Yeah.
And we found out too that I don't know about the science of climate change, and I know there's a lot of different discussions about that. And but I think this is true, that the soils extract carbon dioxide from
Yes.
the atmosphere. Soils that are healthy,
Well, the sort, yeah.
yeah, and that extracts more carbon dioxide than any other thing,
Yes.
and also turns around desertification.
Yes.
Rebuilds habitat and so on, and it also brings down violence because you're not competing so much for land.
Yes.
Farmers and cattle herders, and there's been a complete competition for land here between cattle herders and farmers because of the depletion of the soil. So we don't know what we're going to eat next year in many places.
And because one group is Christian and one group is Muslim, both sides use their faith to justify
violence and competition
conflict,
and so on.
retaliation, counter-retaliation,
And
war.
we find that these things are never reported in a balanced way as well.
No, they're not.
But what we need is not a competition between these, but a cooperation.
Yeah.
Because what we found is that the manure and the from these cattle rebuilds soils and rebuilds farms. And
so we both need each other.
yeah, and that's how it used to be here.
Yes.
They had a cooperative relationship, and they had fertile farms.
And when we can cooperate, then we can live out the gospel before them. The gospel that Jesus preached, not the political one that we've somehow adopted somewhere along the way. And that can bring reconciliation between the communities.
And that's the key to it.
And it can live out the gospel. Then people say, why are you doing this? And we have a chance to preach the gospel, not in a way that's going to be thrown away because it's culturally different, but in a way that can be received.
But it's not seen as a competitive gospel, a political gospel.
No, and it's
true
not.
neighbourliness.
That's right. It's neighbourism. It's living out something that cannot be denied. And when that happens, then the gospel can actually spread to all the gospel-resistant places.
In the last 2 months, we've had cattle herders on our site here, our 30 acres here. We've had 200 cattle sleeping here every night for the last 2 months, and they have been invaluable, giving us manure and urine, and go out and smell it in the night. And I can smell renewed soil. Soil coming alive with ecology, biodiversity in life, and so on, which is so important.
Eden.
And bringing back Eden and rebuilding our relationships.
This is part of what
That's
the
the
new
wonderful
creation.
thing. So we are learning from these people, these Fulani people that come in here. We're now building relationships with them, and we see that their children have no education.
Yes.
How can we help them in their education? And so we're seeing on a cooperative basis helping one another.
Yeah.
And we're both benefiting from this. Our farms have been transformed here.
They are being.
Yeah, and our relationships have been transformed. So this is really what we need to do on a global level, because what we're seeing here is globally important today.
That's right. And this is what new creation is about. This is what resurrection is about. It's more than just us going to heaven when we die. That's great. But what about the world that God made? What about plan A? What about God's plan for his creation? When we read all of the prophets, Isaiah particularly, but all of them, Zechariah, one of my favorite books, we hear about the In this new creation that this rescuer was going to bring in Zechariah, every man would speak to his neighbor and say, "Come and sit down by my fig tree and my vine." Not just that he would have his own fig tree and vine, but that he would invite his neighbor.
So this is peace. And
This is peace.
this is some of these things we just don't see
No.
in the gospel today, because we've made the gospel just an individual
Yeah.
thing. And
We've forgotten who the Prince of Peace is.
And when Jesus was born, the angel said, "Peace on earth and goodwill towards all men." And so this is reconciliation between us and our neighbours, bringing them to sit under our vine and fig tree.
Yes.
And this is one of the things we put off to heaven. We say, "Oh, this earth, you got the reality of opposition and war and so on. It's when we get to heaven that we have this peace and these things." But the early church, they rescinded violence.
They did.
The first 200 years of the church, and this was not a debatable issue.
No.
They were totally one on this. That
Yes.
no Christian was allowed to kill.
Yes.
They weren't allowed to join the Roman army. They weren't allowed to, if they're already in the army, they weren't allowed to kill. They could be a postman or something like that.
Yeah.
But they were not allowed to kill. No abortion, no killing in army, no capital punishment,
No
no
infanticide.
infanticide, no euthanasia. We talk about pro-life today, but
Yeah.
our pro-life is often we choose the lives that we are pro.
Yeah.
We're not pro-life our enemy.
We're not pro-life refugees.
No, and we're not pro-life in military.
We're not pro-life minorities.
We'll go and demonstrate about abortions.
Yeah.
And pro-life needs to be across the board, a consistent, we stand for life, we are creational. And this answers our morality, sexual morality. What's the basis of sexual morality? It's pro-life. This is you see this in the creation in Genesis 1 and 2.
Yeah, that's why God created marriage, to have a safe, nurturing environment for children to grow up in. And you say, "Oh, I don't want to have children." Well, that's your business. But you need to have an environment where they could grow safely if they did come.
The general aspect of creation is life.
Yes.
And so, this is not, today you have a lot of argument between left ring and right ring. I'm sorry, nothing to do with that. There are issues on both sides that are Christian. And it's life, pro-life or procreational.
Yeah.
That's where the church is.
That's
That's where we love and live and share with one another and restore one another.
Absolutely. And this is what the resurrection on that first day of the week brought into being. It made it possible because we're no longer limited by death. We're no longer afraid that we might get crucified or afraid that we might die, because our life is hid in Christ. And even if we do die, we have a resurrection. And the resurrection is not some singing on clouds with little harps. It's a restored world where the wolf lies down with the lamb and every neighbor sits under a fig tree.
Yeah.
And there's no war anymore. There's no tears. There's no suffering. There's no sorrow. It's such a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and the resurrection of Christ brings our faith, it grounds our faith in practical theology.
And practical living.
It's about this life. And these things you describe happen in the resurrection, these wonderful things. But we're to be witnesses of that resurrection now.
We're to begin resurrection
we're to live out
today.
that life today with our neighbours and with our enemies. And they say, "Well, why are you living this way again?" Well, we're witnessing to the world that God is building.
That God transforms, that God brings the dead back to life. The dead soils that we see here where we are, let's bring them back to life. Because when we bring them back to life, the herders and the farmers won't need to compete, because there'll be plenty of pasture, there'll be plenty of crops, plenty of children and plenty to feed them, as Habakkuk says.
Now, you spoke about Plan A.
Yeah.
And this is God's Plan A, was when he made creation and made Adam and Eve, and he gave Adam and Eve, not just Adam, but Adam and Eve, joint dominion. He gave them stewardship over the creation, to steward the creation in the image of God. That means
tend and care for it.
That's right. In his goodness, in his kindness, in his
reflecting what he's like.
So image of God means to reflect God's goodness into the world around them. So that was God's Plan A, and that's still God's plan today. That the creation is to be renewed and to be restored and to be stewarded over by his people.
That's right.
And so there is a bodily resurrection. and there is a fulfillment of the Adamic commission and the Adamic call. So this shows what our faith is about. It's not
Yes.
just about ourselves,
No,
personal
it's not.
salvation, that
Fine.
God's angry at us, and if we want to get to heaven and not suffer when we die, then we need to believe the gospel. It's not.
There's more than that.
It's a lot.
It's just such a tiny little bit
It's
of
about
what the gospel
it's
is.
about God's Adamic commission and call to renew this creation.
Yeah, and all the communities of the
Yeah.
earth, all the nations.
Renewing communities, relationships, with all people.
Yeah, every people group.
Bringing down all these isms in the world, racisms and everything else. If you look at Revelation 21:22, it's heaven and earth coming together, and it's a restored creation. It's not us going away to heaven; it's God coming down to earth.
And you get the river of
His
life.
presence filling
The river of life with the trees growing up and with healing of the nations in their leaves. And that's what we're here to bring. That's what we as the church are supposed to be bringing.
Yeah. So we need to be
Reflecting the
witnesses.
resurrection.
We need to be witnesses of this today in how we treat our enemies and how we build community and how we are about community, not just about ourselves and the wealth of our community or our particular friends, and about how we rebuild the environment. All of these things, this holistic nature
Yes.
of our
All belongs to God.
commission. The church needs to be a witness of these things. We need to be solution people.
Yes.
The resurrection is about solution.
It is. It's about new life. That's what Jesus did on Sunday morning. He overcame death. He brought in new life, and we're part of that new creation. That's what is it in Romans? Corinthians. That God brings in new creation, and He declares new creation.
If anyone be in Christ, he is a
new.
yeah.
Not he is a new creation, but new creation
Well, that's
begins
the literal
through
Greek.
Him. That's
Yeah.
the literal Greek.
Yeah.
New creation, not just me, but my world.
Yeah, and Paul was speaking from a distinctive Hebrew Old Testament theology there about the
Yeah.
new creation, about the new heavens and new earth, and not just the individual person.
This is what makes Easter Sunday so exciting, because what we saw happen in Jesus is what happens in us. Yes, our bodies will one day be resurrected, but even before we get to that point, life is resurrected through His church, reflecting His image into the world, bringing new life.
So we need to finish here. Let's be a people of new creation, which means we are filled with the faith and the passion and the knowledge of what God is doing in our world and restoring our communities, restoring our nations, restoring our relationships, and restoring our environment. And let's really have this passion of the gospel in our hearts and not just see it as just ourselves and our family, but it's about all of us. It's about the whole people internationally that God is bringing us together to bring transformation.
Yes, that's what the church is for. Not just for a nice fellowship. Fellowship is wonderful, but the fellows are in a ship for a reason.
The ship's going somewhere.
And the ship's going somewhere. And we've got to be active sailors and rowers in the ship, taking the ship on to bigger and better things.
So God bless you. Happy Easter Sunday. Share with a meal with your friends. I know there's lockdown, but the kitchen's not locked down and the dining room's not locked down. So God bless you. Share your food with others and look for others who don't have anything. Bless them in Jesus' name. Thank you.
Thank you.